Chapter 9 of the Isis Thesis, the genetics of bacteria and bacteriophage. The nature of the deceased, magician, supermolecule, or cosmic clone. A bacterium is a single-cell microscopic plant-like organism lacking a nucleus. Remembering the pharaoh's model of the earth dung ball and the sun beetle, which we have clarified by assigning the sun beetle the value of phage lambda and the earth dung ball the value of E. coli bacterium, it is important to understand the DNA sequence of bacteria. The bacterial genome is small and highly organized, whereas 95 to 97% of the human genome has no known function. Bacterial genes have regulatory sections of DNA organized into operon units that control transcription. An operon is a gene cluster served by one promoter. RNA polymerase can bind to the promoter region or the regulatory gene and make a repressor molecule that blocks binding of RNA polymerase. Bacteria have three ways of making recombinant DNA, which is the fusion of DNA from two separate individuals. They are transformation, transduction, and conjunction. The Amduat specifically states that the sun god will make his transformations. We could say that both transduction and transformation are occurring in the Egyptian afterlife. First, when the deceased merges with the sun god, the naked DNA or genetic heritage of the deceased is taken up as an insert in the lambda vector or the sun god. And then the recombinant DNA is injected into the bacteria cell at the place of mooring or attached to the site or attachment site to the bacterium, which is Earth. On the cellular level, the injection of lambda DNA is similar to the injection of plasma at the separatrix during impulsive or bursty reconnection at the magnetosphere cusp. DNA becomes naked by exposure to ultraviolet radiation, resulting in the denatured DNA fragments becoming short linear DNAs that generally do not have any origin of replication. Without any origin of replication, linear DNA fragments are soon degraded and the nucleotides recycled a ladishade. With an origin of replication, DNA fragments cross over, splice, or genetically recombine by producing a new chromosome or bacterium with a new combination of genes, a recombinant. So, the recombinant DNA, or rather the union of the deceased and the sun god, is taken up by a host of cells for genetic transformation as phage lambda invades the whole cell and takes over its replication machinery. Recombination requires enzymes to pair up, cut, and splice the two homologous, similar but different DNAs involved. In bacteria, this process of the recombination can occur at any time because the enzymes of DNA repair are present. However, recombination only occurs if extra DNA is present due to transformation, transduction, and so on. Put simply, one cell dies, basically the donor, releasing its chromosomal DNA broken into short linear fragments. Another cell, which is the recipient, takes up the released DNA, now having a complete chromosome plus a fragment. Recombination of DNA repair of the damaged cell can now happen. Not only is transformation occurring in the funerary text, but the primary process is transduction, or the use of bacteriophage to transport the remaining genetic heritage of the deceased into the bacterial host cell. To understand the chemical transformation of the deceased into the great god from dawn, we must look at the nature of the deceased sun god. Objective 6. To understand how the deceased sun god restores the eye of Horus, we must examine his nature and that of his crew. The nature of the deceased sun god. Idea strands 6 through 7. Dear King is God, a magician and savior. Idea strand 11 through 12. Dear King is unique and a lone star in East. Idea strand 88 through 89. Dear King's reborn form is a being with no arms or legs. He is coiled and has a jackal face, celestial serpent middle, and hinder parts like a broad hall. In our discussion of what is above in part 1, the deceased travels to the cups where the sun god and the crew is knit together and about the imperishable stars. He is then literally injected through the gap or origin of reconnection in the Earth's magnetopause so he can navigate to the winding waterway in the sunbark. Space physics evidence suggests this path results in the open field line to the sun's IMF, or what the pharaohs might call going forth by day. As a plasma or ionized gas, the deceased can be described as the central component of the atoms or molecules that are charged carriers such as free electrons, positive ions, and negative ions. Research shows that some of these ions in plasma have complex structures such as an ordinary ion surrounded by a cloud of polarizable molecules, an idea that could be represented by the 8-around-1 arrangement of the sunbark. Another correlation is the Gelman and Niemann in 1960 and 61 discovers the mesons, particles consisting of a quark and an antiquark, could be naturally grouped into octets, and barons into octets and duplets. This is called the eightfold way. Further, the deceased possesses jaws of electrum and lord of electrums. Although the word electrum can indicate the alloy of gold and silver, the term reminds one of the word electron and the idea of the molecule. Reference is made to the deceased king gathering his members in the circumambulating the mounds of Horus and Seth. The deceased king is also called a snake with many coils, which reminds one of the coil protein structures such as alpha helices and the beta strands, and the ideas and the deceased is a long protein chain folding into a computer stable structure. So it seems that the deceased sun god and his 8 companions at the gap of origin of reconnection may actually be a molecule at the polar cell origin of replication that will enter the host cell as a cloning vector and exit as a clone. Along with the molecule nature of the deceased, he has the supernatural attributes. He is the oldest god, one of the great Enad, a falcon, a magician, and the scribe of God's book, the unique one, a bull in the sky, and simply, he is personification of Carl Jung's hero type, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Ultrahuman, and Friedrich Nietzsche's Overman. On the macrocosmic scale, after going towards the pole star, the northern cusp of the gap, the deceased arrives at the staircase cusp where the impulse of magnetic reconnection occurs in the thin current sheets. The tearing of mold hegemony and its instability that recites reconnection is initiated by a population of electrons that are not trapped in the current sheet. According to reconnection theory, the free electrons short the electric field and stabilizes the mode, and magnetic reconnection begins. On a quantum level, the supramolecular sunbark operates similar to the lambda DNA injected into the host cell. The origin of magnetic reconnection in the magnetosphere becomes an origin for cell entry in the DNA replication in the cell. An E. coli bacterium has a special polar receptor site for lambda absorption called the LAM receptor. In fact, one-cell bacteria such as E. coli also have mechanisms whereby gene transcription is initiated by available iron complexes on the cell surface. Iron is essentially for E. coli, and the references to iron are widespread in the funerary text. While research shows iron nuclei are present at the polar cusp, because what is above is what is below, this translates to iron being present at the Earth's cell's poles. At the gap or the horn of a mint, the deceased bonds with the sun god and his crew at the 8 of the bark. A group traveling and working together for a common purpose, the transformation of the deceased into the new horse species. It seems as if the pharaoh understood supramolecular chemistry, or the 21st century study of ensembles of molecules working together, reacting like supermolecule components. The sun god and his crew communicate, form associations, have preferences and aversions, following instructions, and pass on information. In supramolecular chemistry, one molecule is able to distinguish another by its shape or properties. A type of molecule social order is also evident in the Amduat, for knowledge of the souls is stressed to the deceased sun god, bonded to the sun god on the bark. The deceased and his crew of 8 in the cellular world may easily be thought of as molecules consisting of single continuous networks of atoms linked together by covalent bonds. In fact, the sun god and his crew may represent a nucleosome. In the transcription process, the DNA double helix wraps around a core of 8 histone protein molecules, and a second histone H1 secures the DNA to the nucleosome core. The histones may activate or silence genes. The octamer of 8 proteins is the fundamental packing unit called a nucleosome. The histone core structure is anchored to the backbone of the chromosome and is evolutionarily conserved across the spectrum of the eukaryotic cell. Histone, like the hydrogen ions in our macroscopic model, are positively charged so that they can interact with the negatively charged DNA as they exercise control of gene activity. Looking imaginatively at the structure of the nucleosome core, some might perceive a jackal face, and this may have been what motivated the pharaohs with their depth vision to claim the deceased king's form in that of Anubis, having a jackal face, a celestial serpent middle, and a spine of a doorbolt. A possible reference to the second histone and the bolts the DNA to the core. Molecular recognition. Without doubt, the numerous deities and serpents recognize the dead sun god, who also recognizes the names and functions of all the deities and serpents in the duat. New chemists call this quantum capability molecular recognition. Another term, supermolecule, distinguishes ions or molecules united with one another by weaker bonds into a discrete unit with a well-defined structure and dynamics, such as the representation of the deceased sun god and his crew in the process of translation to protein. Supramolecular chemistry sets up molecular systems that can differentiate one specific kind of molecule from many others. As the text corroborates, when describing deities in this dwarf world duat, the pharaoh took advantage of these same strategies to distinguish different atoms and molecules by distinctive anthropomorphic epithets, symbols, and definite drawings. Another way modern chemists explain molecular recognition is by the metaphor of the lock and key, whereby the enzyme, which is the lock, has a molecular shape complementary to the substrate, which is the key. New chemists also define chemical molecules by using metaphorical terms such as ether chains and rings, protein binding groups, nitrogen junctions, and so-called crowns, cup-like shape, cage-like or bowl-like receptors, a carceran, which is really a molecular prison for small substrates, and a bowl-like receptor. And knotted molecules. In fact, researchers using X-ray crystallography have identified 8 groups of DNA binding proteins, dividing them further into 54 structural families. The 8 groups are helix turn helix, or HTH, including the wing HTH, zinc coordinating, zipper tight, other alpha helix, beta sheet, beta hairpin, and ribbon, other, and enzymes. Other enzymes. Sorry, guys. As an example, Crow and the repressor family of phage lambda are in the helix turn helix group, and is the prokaryotic LAC1 repressor family. Eukaryotic protein or wing HTH and the protein heat shock transcription factor is listed in the transcription factor family. The zinc binding eukaryotic proteins in group 2 include beta alpha zinc finger proteins. Also, of these groupings reflect the use of the molecular recognition system based on metaphors of wings, helices, ribbons, fingers, zippers, and families, so that the modern chemist can envision and transcribe the image of the molecule. In like manner, the common use of wings or serpents in deities along with coiled serpents may represent this same tactic of defining specific protein DNA complexes. Distinguishing the terms in a duat, such as crowns and circles or rings around with the drawings such as the cage around the sun god and the chain of rope loops on the bark, the deceased headdress of a circular disc, or rings around the horizontal ram's horns, and the deity seated in bowl-like receptors, all suggest the same 21st century method of using metaphors to explain chemical concepts. Even Osiris bent backwards into a ring is a scene depicting the creation. May indicate the destructory path that a molecule can take as it twists into rings, or the act of rolling circle replications of phage lambda For the pharaohs, the instructional strategy conveyed specific ideas of the kings and the nobilities while distinguishing these same concepts for the plebs. Both modern and supramolecular chemistry and the Egyptian science is based on the metaphoric terminology used in familiar objects such as wings, crowns, rings, and cups that point to the chemical complexes or processes. I can get a look at figure 9.1, and it's got these definitions here. I'll read them all. Self-assembly, the spontaneous association of several molecular components into a discrete, non-covalently bonded aggregate with a well-defined structure, binding with a purpose. The spontaneous self-organization. The spontaneous ordering of molecular or supramolecular units into a high-order, non-covalent structure characterized by some degree or spatial or temporal order or designed by correlations between remote regions will exhibit collective and often non-linear behavior, could include crystallization and related ordering phenomena such as liquid crystallinity.